It was Benjamin Franklin who famously said, "In this world, nothing is certain but death and taxes." And he was right. Today we're going to talk about death taxes, and it's a topic that most people don't know a whole lot about, which is sort of the standard we use for these educational videos to help inform. And so before I get started, I just want to kind of say that taxes of all kinds are very complicated, and so a little bit of information that you might get from a video or from a Google search is hopefully helpful, but it certainly isn't. It isn't what I would use to make important financial or legal decisions. So if something on this video makes you pause and think about your own situation, I really recommend you consult with a professional, because it's impossible in this video to cover all of the exceptions and exceptions of the exceptions. The idea is we want to give basic information so that you know how death taxes might affect you and what you can do to help help yourself and help your family. Okay, so without further ado, what are death taxes? So there are a number of different kinds of taxes, both state and federal, that sort of come into play upon death. And so the most heard of those is the estate tax. And so there is an estate tax at the federal level, and there is an estate tax at the state level here in Maryland. And some other states have estate taxes as well. Not every state has one, but certainly Maryland does. There's another kind of death tax that is just at the state level, which is the inheritance tax. We'll talk about that a little bit later. There's also a generation skipping transfer tax, which is a federal tax. And there is a gift tax, which is also a federal tax. And you'll see how the gift tax and the estate tax, how they kind of work together in a unified way. Finally, there are income taxes that sort of come up when someone has passed, in the transfer of assets from them as they were living to their beneficiaries. Sometimes that can cause there to be some income taxes, so they're certainly important to consider as well. Okay, so now the good, the bad, and the ugly. So the good news for many of us are that a lot of these death taxes simply won't apply, and I'll explain why. So the estate tax, for example, and the generation skipping transfer tax and the gift tax, all at the federal level, have what are called exemption amounts. So basically that means that if at the time of your death, under current law, and I'm recording this in the year 2024, under current law in 2024, the federal estate tax exemption amount is a little over $13.6 million, and that's per person. So for a married couple, in theory, you could pass over $26 million in wealth at the time of your death and not pay a penny of estate tax. So that's good news. Generation skipping transfer tax, also same exemption amounts, although it applies a little bit differently. The gift tax, during our lifetime, when we give large gifts, and again in 2024 a large gift would be anything over $18,000 to one person. When we give large gifts, we have to file gift tax return. Doesn't mean there's going to be a gift tax due at that time, but through life, as we give those major gifts and file a gift tax return, when you add all that up, that's going to count against your exemption amount at the time of your passing. But again, for most people, it's not going to be an issue under current law. So that's the good news. I mentioned inheritance tax, which is a state level tax. And again, that doesn't apply for many people. I'm going to explain a little bit, and then we're going to focus on the other types of taxes. Inheritance tax, again, in Maryland, it's a state level tax. It only applies to transfers at death to people who are not close relatives. So a close relative would be a spouse, a child, a sibling, a parent. In addition to a close relative, it also could be a qualified charitable organization. If your bequest is to any of those people, it's probably going to be exempt from the state inheritance tax. But if your bequest is to someone else, like a cousin or an aunt or uncle, or to a friend, those bequests may be subject to an inheritance tax, and that's a tax on the beneficiary. So we'll put that aside for a moment and focus again and talk about some of the good, the bad, and the ugly of the estate tax, the generation skipping transfer tax, and to some degree the gift tax. So here's the deal. Again, in 2024, this isn't going to apply to many people. You would have to be what we would call a higher net worth person in order to get ensnared into the estate tax or the generation skipping transfer tax or even the gift tax if you're making major transfers of wealth during your lifetime. So that's good. Here's the problem and the caution. is that the estate tax and the inheritance tax, the estate tax, the gift tax, and the generation skipping transfer tax are all subject to change. And in fact, we know that those exemption amounts will change. Next year in 2025, those exemption amounts will go up. But unless Congress acts, in 2026, those exemption amounts are going to go down pretty significantly. So it's one of those things where you really have to monitor it. The good news also is that we have the ability as estate planning attorneys to engage with you to see if you have an estate tax issue or generation skipping transfer tax issue or gift tax issue and address it proactively. There's lots of tools that we have to be able to minimize or actually completely eliminate the prospect of any of those death taxes. Again, it changes over time. We're in a presidential year. There's going to be an election, not only for president, but members of Congress. That will have a tremendous impact over what the future of those types of death taxes are at the federal level. So very important to sort of stay plugged in. And if you're anywhere close, like if you have an estate of, I would say, more than $2 million, you really just want to pay attention. Make sure that over time, as your estate grows, hopefully, and the exemption amount may change, that you don't unwittingly become involved in a situation where you may have a death tax. For estate tax purposes, any transfer at death of basically anything that you control at the time of your death is included in that amount. So it does include things like retirement accounts and life insurance and business interests, really everything that you own or control at the time of your death. So it's a general rule. So that's my big overview of death taxes. Now, there also are income tax considerations as well. So what I mean by that is twofold. Two of the most common issues that I think people should consider are the following when it comes to income tax. The value of assets when they transfer from one person to another because the owner has died and transferred it to beneficiaries really gets one of the most beneficial rules in the income tax code at the federal level, and it's called the basis adjustment. So basically, the tax basis of an asset like an investment property or stocks and bonds and things like that, when they transfer from the person who owned it at the time of their death to a beneficiary, the beneficiary takes their tax basis is based on the value at the time of death. So that's really, if you think about it, that can be a tremendous benefit for trying to eliminate capital gains tax on the beneficiary when the beneficiary later sells the property. That's just something to be aware of. Now, as estate planners, we sometimes have the ability to exploit that and make sure that certain assets do pass at the time of death and not earlier in order to put the beneficiary in the very best tax position. The other income tax issue to think about are tax-deferred retirement accounts. So many people and most of our clients have invested in retirement plans. So a traditional retirement plan like a 401k, a 457, a 403b, an individual retirement account like an IRA, or for federal employees, thrift savings accounts. Those types of accounts are tax deferred, meaning when you made the transfer into that account in connection either with your employment or in the case of an IRA, just a transfer to the custodian every year, you're benefiting yourself in that year for taxation. So you're getting it out of the taxable, your taxable income for that year. But the flip side of that is when the money comes out later on in retirement, it is subject to income tax. So it's also subject to income tax when you die, when an account owner dies with a retirement account, and that account distributes out to beneficiaries either through a beneficiary designation or through a trust or in any other way. It is ultimately going to be subject to income tax when it comes out to the beneficiary. Now, the rules around that are extremely complex, and if you attempt to do any sort of Google search to try to understand those rules, it's going to be very, very difficult to do that. So I would just advise you, if you participate in a retirement account, they can be very beneficial, but also there's a lot to know about how those accounts are treated, not only when you make withdrawals, but also importantly, when those distributions are made to your beneficiaries. And there are very specific rules around that. And the timing and how long your beneficiary will have to withdraw the full account balance, which also has implications to them in terms of the taxes they will pay when the money comes out. So again, taxation around death taxes, if you will, the rules are very complicated and difficult to understand, but importantly, they're always changing. So new tax code updates, new regulations, and et cetera, that can really change the way that taxes work for us around death. And it's very, very important for most people who are concerned about that. So any questions about that, feel free to give us a call here at Johnson Law. We'd be happy to sit down with you, take a look at your current estate plan and what your goals are, and help put a great plan in place that not only is tax efficient, but also addresses your other concerns like avoiding probate, maximizing your ability to pay for long-term care, take care of your beneficiaries, your surviving spouse, et cetera. And that's what people really do care about. So feel free to give us a call, 410-570-1671. Thank you.